guys, I'm Justin Burkholtz. Thank you for watching. Today I've got another book review for you. I'm going to be reviewing the book, The Immortality Key, The Secret History of the Religion with No Name by Brian C. Muraresku. This is an absolutely amazing book. I wrote a review of it for my blog a little while ago, but I realized I hadn't made a review for the channel, so I'm gonna rectify that today. Alright, but before I get to the good stuff, if you like book reviews, if you like videos about religious history or spiritual practices or anything like that, make sure to hit the subscribe button. That really helps me out to grow the channel. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, so The Immortality Key by Brian Muraresku. This is a very interesting book that really challenges the prevailing narratives of the history of Western civilization and Christianity. And honestly, when I first heard about it, I thought that the idea was a little far-fetched, and I kind of dismissed it at first. I lumped it in with books like The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross by John M. Allegro, and I kind of just ignored it. I had read that and researched it and looked into it and couldn't really find a lot of evidence to support the claims he had made about Christianity, and I kind of just lumped this one in with that and ignored it for a while until it came up again and again. Eventually, I actually saw Brian on a podcast, and he was so intelligent and charming and interesting that I decided I really needed to give his book a shot, and I'm so glad that I did. He picks up on the trail left off by R. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hoffman, and Carl Ruck in their book, The Road to Eleusis. In that book, they talk about the Eleusinian mysteries and the idea that the Kukion beverage or elixir that they would consume in those mysteries most likely had some kind of psychedelic component to it, either by ergot-based or mushroom-based or something like that. Well, Brian picks up where they left off, and he does a ton of investigation, over a decade worth of his own hard time and investigation, and travels all over Europe and the Mediterranean to really put together a paradigm-shifting work. He had to search the Vatican Secret Archives, unheard of archeological sites, and closely guarded early Christian catacombs. But he managed to uncover shocking evidence that may forever change the way we think about the origins of Western civilization and its oldest institution, Christianity. He details this investigation and his travels throughout Europe in the book, and that is part of what makes it such a fun book to read. Think like Dan Brown novels, but real and possibly even more interesting and out there. It is incredibly engaging, and I found it very difficult to put down. Brian is passionate, energetic, and funny, and it really comes across in his writing. This book is so good, as soon as I finished it, I gave it to one of my friends to read. And I'm certainly not the only one who feels this way. Almost immediately after its release, The Immortality Key was being talked about and praised by people around the world. Scholars and academics have referenced it, podcasters were scrambling to get Brian on their show, and for good reason. His premise goes something like this. Eleusis was considered by the ancient Greeks and Romans to be a vital foundation to civilization. All of the important figures of the time were initiates, including such influential figures as Plato, Marcus Aurelius, and others. And the mysteries of Eleusis involved, among other things, the consumption of a special brew known as the Kukion. However, the details of what exactly happened at Eleusis and what the actual ingredients were for the Kukion were very closely guarded secrets. Secrets guarded upon punishment of death. So we don't know what exactly it was. However, we do have some accounts of people having powerfully transformative, visionary experiences under its influence. Powerfully transformative, visionary experiences that almost perfectly mirror modern-day accounts of people's experiences with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Therefore, it is not unreasonable to infer that the Kukion may have also been a psychedelic brew of some kind. So far, none of this is radical and is accepted by most scholars. But no one knew of any physical evidence to support this theory. That is until Brian uncovered a little-known scientific paper in an obscure language, Catalan, that suggested that such evidence had in fact been found. He then goes on to reveal other evidence from finds in Göbekli Tepe, Egypt, Israel, and other places that suggest that psychedelic beers and wines were commonplace in the ancient world, and that the knowledge of how to make these brews may even predate history as we know. He even makes a rather convincing argument that brewing beer predates the use of grains for things like baking, and that the agricultural revolution may actually have been the beer revolution. And in fact, that ancient beer was used in highly religious contexts and ceremonies, which could have been direct archaic precursors to Eleusis. All of which is incredibly fascinating, but the really radical part of this book is centered around what is called the pagan continuity hypothesis. The premise of which is that Christianity didn't just spontaneously appear without any influence of the current cultures in which it appeared, but that it adapted and continued some of the Greek and pagan traditions and incorporated them into the new religion. This is also not controversial. It is common knowledge that Christianity adapted some pagan traditions and celebrations, such as Christmas. What is radical is that Brian suggests that the original Christian Eucharist may have been a continuation of the long tradition of psychedelic brews as sacrament. He provides incredible textual, archeological, and artistic evidence to support this theory. And by providing some much needed context about the Greek culture in which Christianity arose, he shows that the original audience for which the Gospels were written would have read them very differently than we do today, especially the Gospel of John. They would have understood the references that we so easily miss today. The Gospel of John has clear and deliberate references meant to appeal to Greek women familiar with the Dionysian cult, a cult centered around a psychedelic wine sacrament. And he makes it very clear that everything they use to get from Dionysus, they can also get from Jesus and his wine sacrament. He then goes on to ask the question, if all of this is true, what happened? When did the powerfully transformative sacrament get replaced with the placebo? And why? The answer, it seems, has to do with women. Specifically, women who had advanced knowledge of plants and their potential for medical and psychoactive application. In other words, witches. Witches who challenged the church's monopoly on healing, and of course, he provides evidence from the Vatican's own records to prove this. The scope of the book is incredible. I know, from prehistoric graveyard beer to ancient Greek psychedelic ceremonies to medieval witches being burned at the stake for their knowledge of plants. It documents the eternal clash of two opposing worldviews, one which embraces and empowers women in the natural world, and one which seeks to subjugate and dominate them, a clash that is still ongoing today. Now here I do want to point out that Brian, the author, himself is a Catholic. He was raised Catholic, he went to a Jesuit university, got a degree in Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit, and most of the people he interviews and speaks with in the book are also Catholic. The book is not anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, or anti-religious at all. In fact, here are Brian's own words on the matter. So here I quote, "I didn't write this book to be anti-organized religion. In some cases, it's the exact opposite. In the intro, I mentioned Brother David Steindl-Rast, a Benedictine monk, who is a hero of mine. He talks about the tension between mystics and the dogma and doctrine of organized faith. I don't think you can have one without the other. The balance, as Brother David says, is to rediscover that original visionary power and live in it as a lived experience. This is what Joseph Campbell says of religion being a lived experience. We're talking about emotional potential. That's how the great anthropologist Clifford Geertz defines religion. These powerful, pervasive, long-lasting moods and motivations. That only happens when you're talking about something that gets inside of people's bones. That's what the mystical experience is. It's how these religions are born. Brother David says it's virtually impossible to start a religion without mystical experience, like Moses in the burning bush, Paul on the road to Damascus, or Peter in Acts, caught up in a trance. The Immortality Key is an absolutely incredible book, and one that I think everyone should read, especially if you come from a Christian background like myself. It sheds some much needed light on the environment in which Christianity arose and tells the story of a part of our history which has been mostly forgotten. Forgotten not because it became irrelevant, but because it was brutally suppressed for hundreds of years by the oldest and largest institution in the world, the Catholic Church. But I believe, as does Brian, that hidden within that forgotten part of our history lies the answer to the meta-crisis facing humanity today. The Immortality Key itself is that answer, which, by the way, is not a substance or a drug, but an experience. The experience of dying before death, which is why the book opens up with a quote which is inscribed at St. Paul's Monastery on Mount Athos in Greece. And it may sound strange to us today, but to the ancient, this wasn't strange at all. It says, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. That may sound cryptic, but it reminds me of the second to last stanza of St. Francis of Assisi's great poem, The Canticle of the Sun, which reads like this. Woe to those who die in mortal sin. Blessed are those who will find your most holy will, for the second death shall do them no harm. Together, I think these both start to make a little more sense. How do you find God's will for your life? Your most holy will. By dying before you die, of course. Then there's the promise of immortality. The second death shall do you no harm. Or you won't die when you die. Simple, right? Well, if that sounds interesting to you, I'll have a link below. Pick up a copy of the Immortality Key. I think it's very, very interesting and totally changed a lot of the prevailing narratives, like I said, of the origins of Western civilization and Christianity, and maybe even agriculture. Really fascinating. So I hope you like it. If you like the review, let me know. Leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and consider supporting me on Patreon. There's going to be a link below. If you want to join for as little as $5 a month, you can help support my efforts here. Or you can buy a copy of my latest book, Luna, which just recently came out. It's a collection of rituals and ceremonies to make use of the different lunar phases. And it has a collection of myths and meditations and all kinds of stuff about the moon. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can pick up a copy using the link below. All right, well, before I go, I want to say thank you to my patrons who do support me and for everyone who has picked up a copy of my book. Thank you to all of you, and I hope you all have a good weekend.